On today's episode,
a lot of people, especially people who lived in red states, had the impression that Dobbs had just made this drastic change in things and improved things tremendously, and it hadn't really. And this fact now, we've got the data for it now saying, yeah, there are actually more abortions happening now after Dobbs. Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Our world today presents people with complicated issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. It can be a struggle to understand or deal with them. We're here to help by bringing good information and a fresh biblical perspective to these matters and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischman and Jeff Samuelson. And we welcome you to the month of February, and we are going to tackle the past month's current events here in the episode today. There's been a lot going on, but we are going to start with the pro-life movements, slow down or turn away from the Trump administration. So we just want to talk about maybe the landscape of the pro-life movement and the current administration and what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there are probably a lot of people who are right now saying, I told you so, you didn't listen. There's just a much more of a sense, and it became just a lot of the things that I was seeing with commentary from various groups and individuals associated with the pro-life movement. Just things are kind of coming to a head, particularly with the March for Life in January, and inviting Vice President Vance, and he came to speak at that and things like that. And there was just a lot of sense of, hey, you're saying all these things about how pro-life you are and how much we should be supporting you, but you're not actually doing all the things that a pro-life administration would be doing. And what's the deal? And if you don't follow through, then we're not going to be the easy votes or diehard supporters that we had been. Probably the primary thing that is motivating this slow turn away is that the Trump administration has so far pretty much refused to put any limitations on the abortion pill. And that's something that basically they could have done with the stroke of a pen the moment Donald Trump took the oath of office. And they have not done so. There doesn't seem to be any indication that it's going to be happening. When they put Robert F. Kennedy in charge of the Health and Human Services, he certainly has never been somebody who was a pro-life friend, and so it's not surprising that his department is not acting on this, but it was something that pro-lifers had asked for, and to a certain extent they were expecting. And it's been a year now, and there's been no action. And there have been plenty of other things where the administration has been, if not anti-life, not pro-life where they could have been. IVF is one big example of that. There have been a few wins here so far for the pro-life movement that haven't really cost the administration much. Like there was just very recently a ban on using tissue from aborted babies in federally funded research. That's a great thing. We're happy about that. But it's relatively small compared to all the other issues that are out there.
And small considering the power that he has.
Yeah.
I mean, just a swipe of a pen could change some of this.
Do you think there is, maybe a mindset or so? Because I've heard just a lot of people say like, he's been the most pro-life president that we've ever had. Like he was way better than Bush and all this kind of stuff. Do you think like maybe there is this like, well, yeah, I mean, we got the Dobbs decision and look what I did and this, I've done it. I've achieved this goal and now it doesn't really matter. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of, I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but I think there's a lot of wishful thinking involved in calling President Trump the most pro-life president there's been. He achieved one of the primary goals of the pro-life movement in recent years, which was he appointed to the Supreme Court the justices who ended up turning the tides so that the Dobbs decision would come down, which reversed Roe v. Wade. But even he is on record after that decision saying, I don't know, I think maybe they went too far. I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but that's basically, the gist of it. And as a younger man, he was not pro-life. And it really just seems to have been a very transactional thing that, okay, I need the votes of these people, so I'm going to do these things and make them happy, and then they'll support me. And that was the first administration. And now with his second administration, okay, this is my perspective, so I'm not claiming deep insight on this, but it really seems like he's like, well, okay, they're in the bag.
Yeah.
I've got their support already, so I really don't need to do anything that's going to satisfy them, except maybe throw them a little crust of bread here and there. And that's pretty much what we've seen. And there's concern now about what's going to happen when some of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court either retire or die, because there's concern, well, is he going to do the same kind of thing that he did in his first administration to make sure that the right kind of justices get put forward? Or are we going to have to wait until, whoever's in the administration following, which there's certainly no guarantee it's going to be a conservative, pro-life president making those nominations after that. And so there's a lot going on with that kind of stuff.
The pro-life movement's always encountered political realities. In other words, you never get everything that you want. And I think one of the things that I'm sensing from mainstream pro-life movement is Trump invoked all the right phrases during campaigning and so forth that we all found very pleasing. And depending on who you read, they interpret it as, well, I gave them the justices, they got the Dobbs ruling. It's a states' rights issue now, so I can move on to other things. And that's always been the political reality. I did kind of a big search over the last 10 or 15 years for when this has happened and other times, with whether it's a presidential election or a representative or a senator and so forth. This goes on all the time. You still have your 100% to maintain their 100% rating with pro-family or pro-life agencies. But a lot of them who started off 100% end up with 86%, 91% because they didn't vote completely company line. The thing that's a particular frustration is there's a certain bullishness about the way that the Trump administration enacts what he sees as important. In other words, I'm going to make all of these changes in the first 100 days. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And he does. I mean, he signs these things. He seems to be like Teflon, no matter what they yell at him. He just kind of ignores it. And then all of a sudden on some of these things, pro-life things, he seems to have kind of like, oh, yeah, fine. And so that's why I think when I've read editorials on it, the feeling is I've given them more than they've had for years. Time to move on to other things. And that's the harsh reality when it comes to politics.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was just kind of what I was wondering with all that too. Well, another article that we had too that kind of related to the abortion was abortion's rise after Dobbs. Bob, this was one that you had brought to our attention. Can you describe it a little bit for us?
Well, one of the things that happened after Roe v. Wade in 1973 was the abortion movement was surgical. In other words, everything was surgical. It was dilation, evacuation. It was, depending on what stage of the pregnancy, it always involved surgically going in and literally taking the child's life and removing the child. And then leading up to Dobbs, they began to start refining a chemical way to end a pregnancy, to take the child's life with a pill, the abortion pill, as we say, which is really more of a regimen of pills and treatment. So while Dobbs was his great victory, they already had this second notion of how we can meet this need. And now, as of today, this morning, I was reading an article that Texas has filed a lawsuit against a doctor in Delaware for prescribing the abortion pill to a woman in Texas. There's some complicated legislation going on here. There's a thing called the Comstock Law, and the Comstock Law dates back to the 1800s, late 1800s, and it basically prevented you from transporting pornography across state lines. It prevented you from transporting harmful medical stuff across lines, that kind of stuff. Well, and it's for the most part, well, first of all, just look at pornography. Well, don't look at pornography. but I mean,
you heard it here.
Yeah. But you take pornography as an example. I mean, that borders mean nothing with that. And now we've got the abortion drug. So I think what Texas is trying to do is trying to reinforce that and see what's going to happen. And I personally, I think it's going to blow up in their face, because you got to be able to demonstrate that everyone really wants this. And I think the reality is the fact that when you count in chemical abortions, abortion pill abortions, the numbers have gone up since Dobbs.
And this is relating to what we were talking about with the previous point, that this has been one of the things that perhaps will be motivating what we might call more casual pro-lifers to take a closer look at the actual political situation. A lot of people, especially people who lived in red states, had the impression that Dobbs had just made this drastic change in things and improved things tremendously, and it hadn't really. And this fact now, we've got the data for it now saying, there are actually more abortions happening now after Dobbs. And that relates then to the whole abortion pill stuff, because, again, shouldn't need to be at the situation where Texas is suing Delaware, or I think there was a doctor in Delaware, and there was one also with Louisiana and a doctor in California. Because if the federal government said, oh no, we're pulling this or we're restricting this, it would settle a lot of these questions. But the federal government has not done that.
I'm a hobbyist. I mean, I like handyman stuff, fixing things. And they always say that water is like your number one danger in a house. You got a leak in the roof. It just finds its way through. If there's one problem I've seen in watching the pro-life movement for the last 4+ decades watching from the inside, is that I think we sell short what an evil-inclined heart will want to do. It's like water. It finds its way to accomplish its opposition to God, no matter what. You dam it up here, and it just kind of finds its way around it, and it still gets in. So we throw out Roe v. Wade through the Dobbs ruling, and people who are determined to thumb their nose at God and say, it's my body, my choice, and if I don't want to carry this child, then I'm going to find a way to do it. One of the biggest challenges after being head of this organization for all these years is that my number one frustration is always linear thinkers. I mean, people who think, well, we just overturn Roe v. Wade, things will be better. Or we get a human life amendment, things will be better. I always try to remind people, those are great sermons to the people who are already in church. The people like it. But you got to remember that the people whose hearts are contrary to God, who want to say that, even if they say, I believe in God or I believe in Jesus, but they want to draw this line that says, but I don't want God to intrude in my life at this point, they're just going to find a way. And they always have. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what we're seeing happening now. And there's another thing, too. This morning, I don't know if you saw on the news, we're recording this here at the end of January. On the news this morning, they arrested the CNN broadcast. I'm not going to mention his name. The former CNN broadcaster for in that church protest up in Minneapolis.
I hadn't seen that.
Okay, so there's charges against him. And one of the people interviewed on the news show I was watching said, when you arrest a high-profile person, you actually feed the momentum behind what they're doing. And the same thing, too, when you got people who are fighting vehemently for abortion rights, and you got something like Dobbs coming down, it only intensifies them and inspires them, because now they add to it this notion of a martyrdom. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to suffer for this, and it makes them extremely passionate and determined.
Well, a lot there.
Yeah, yes, there is.
And I'm sure we'll be touching more on all of that in the future as well. Another article that we wanted to get to was one that I believe you had come across, Jeff, with the 7 surprising, hopeful things we've learned about dementia. Yeah. So can you tell us what some of these surprising things are here?
Yeah, and most of these are things that are, okay, this is a good development. It's not, okay, it's done, it's fixed or anything like that. But the first one they list in the article is an Alzheimer's blood test, which is not something that we've had before. And this raises the possibility that we'll be able to detect Alzheimer's a lot earlier in people, which means you can get treated. You can take proactive measures or whatever a lot earlier.
And some of them are saying that it'll detect it before you have any of the symptoms.
Yeah.
So it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so that's a really good thing. They've also, this one I found kind of fascinating, improving Alzheimer's treatment delivery. Basically, there's some drugs that they've said, well, this is really good at dealing with the proteins that are in the brain that are going haywire or whatever. But the problem is that there's this wonderful thing that God designed into our bodies called the blood-brain barrier, which keeps most stuff from your blood getting into your brain. Well, that also means that these drugs don't get into your brain to do that. And I think it was something like only 1%, or maybe it was even less than that, of the drug actually in the past made it across the blood-brain barrier. But now they've developed some ways that they can get more of the drug through that barrier. And so that's good news for treatment. Not so much for Alzheimer's, but for Huntington's disease, they've actually been working on gene therapy in the brain, basically to rewire at the most fundamental level some of the things that are causing problems there. They've figured out some more things about fighting inflammation and what role that has with putting people at risk for various forms of dementia. Interesting one that is particularly today, they're finding that vaccines may reduce dementia risk. And particularly mentioned the shingles vaccine, but they're thinking maybe some others as well. It's not a vaccine against dementia itself, but the thinking is that fighting these viruses keeps the infections down, and that is perhaps a risk factor there. It may also just be some sense of the vaccines activate the immune system in a positive way. There more information about how interventions with lifestyle can lead to better cognition, the brain working better with nutrition and exercise, training, health monitoring. And the last one they listed was a newly discovered link to lithium, that it may be, the term was neuroprotective, that it will help, in any certain form, it will help keep bad things from happening to your brain.
Yeah.
With everything we're going through here in our family with Diane and her glioblastoma, we've learned an awful lot about the blood-brain barrier, how impenetrable it is. And it's a wonder of God's creation that it's so impenetrable. But when you're looking for some traditional treatment things, it makes the brain almost inaccessible. And because the brain is very susceptible to contamination if you didn't have that blood-brain barrier. So we studied a lot of that. There's a lot of things going on, even behind the scenes, behind these 7 points, that I think are valuable to know. One of the areas where I disagree with the current administration is the defunding of mRNA research, because in order to transport protein and to affect change, you literally have to hide it in a virus, and you have to get it to transport over to where it's going. Now, we're going to have an episode coming up sometime soon with Dr. Rob Valza, and he talked a little bit about that as well. But I think, I still think, based on everything I've studied with it, not only just in the course of my work here at CLR, but now on a personal level with our care for Diane, is you get these methods that can get past that blood-brain barrier to possibly treat things like that. The crazy thing about Alzheimer's is they're still just not sure exactly what's going on. And even when I read the part about the inflammation, now generally inflammation of the brain makes you nauseous. It makes you sick. It gives you a headache. That's always inflammation. That's what we're finding with it. But it also makes you think fuzzy, makes you think, inconsistent. And so if they can get inflammation down, but then they talk about, is there this Is there a coating on the nerve endings? Is that really the problem? And they're not sure. And so they're trying, and there's all sorts of incredibly promising potential treatments, but everything is a long journey. Like if you've got a loved one who's got Alzheimer's, when you hear promises of, potential treatments, there's a couple of things you got to remember. First of all, by the time you go through the trials, you're probably talking 7 years, 10 years. Also, just remember everything that's a might, could, would, should, today, only about 10% of them actually ever materialize. So, but they are finally, I think, making some progress in this area. It always reminds me, my benchmark is always breast cancer. We've made remarkable progress. Somebody today who says, my mother or my grandmother died of breast cancer, I don't want to go through all that. If God's going to take me, God's going to take me. You do that. That thinking doesn't work today, because what happened just 10 years ago, we're leaps and bounds further down the road in breast cancer. Well, now we're seeing that attention to Alzheimer's, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that too, because I know so many just families personally too that are influenced or affected by that. So,
and it takes a long, and I know, Krista, and when we're doing our pre-talk here before we go on, Krista was saying, maybe we're going to on every episode have to have an update on AI, but AI, they're talking about AI being able to accelerate the trial period on a lot of these theories, on how to treat it. So there's hope there.
Yeah. Well, the next article that we are going to talk about was one that Jeff had brought up, and I was really interested in it because it talked about the soaring price of youth sports. So, Jeff, can you give us a little bit of a background on that article?
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that I'm sure a lot of parents, they just look at the headline and is like, oh yeah, I already know what that's about because they're dealing with it. But if you haven't had kids in sports recently, or somehow you've managed to have kids and just be completely separate from this or whatever, it is surprising that there are leagues that parents are putting their kids in where it costs $50 just to try out for it. And the fee to actually just be in the league is in the thousands of dollars. These are travel teams, these are special this, that, and the other things for all sorts of different sports. And even aside from the question of, is it wise to be putting your children into these situations? Is this good parenting? It's just the money. It's very hard to keep up. Back when I was traveling a lot more on weekends, almost every other time that I stayed in a hotel in some reasonably big area, there would be kids there because there was some traveling tournament or game or something like that. And these were the teams there for, whether it was, basketball or soccer or whatever. And these things cost money, not just the league, but then you have to pay for transportation. Then you have to pay for hotels and all these kinds of things. And there's a lot of pressure to shell out all this money, pressure on parents. But there's really little evidence that it's actually good for the kids, that the kids are actually gaining anything from the experience or the training that they're getting. And sadly, this wasn't really in the article, but it really figures into the idea that a lot of people are, younger people are given that having kids is super expensive today.
Yeah.
And that becomes a disincentive for people who are at the age when they could be having children. They're like, I don't know if we can spend that kind of money. Or so they have none or they have fewer than they otherwise would. When if they just kind of said, we're not going to step onto that carousel. We're not getting into that. It wouldn't be so expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, too, I look at my friends, too, that just have one or two kids, and that really does seem to be, like, very much a part of their life, too, is the sports teams and everything. And, I mean, I think they look like at somebody like, me that has 4 and are like, oh, man, like, how would you be able to do that? And it's like, yeah, we don't.
Now, I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I guess maybe I do want to. What do you guys think of...
It's what you do, Bob.
Yes, it is. It is what I do. Do you think sports betting has had a positive or negative influence on children's sports? there's kind of this axiom that you can always follow the money. And, now that, I think a lot of us who are not involved with gambling are not aware of the intricacies for which you can gamble nowadays. I mean, there's all sorts of little things you can gamble on. And so there just seems to be a lot of emphasis on, preparing, the next generation of athletes. And
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly about the correlation there, if there is with gambling and children's sports. I mean, I will say personally, I have been very surprised. Just realizing it has been very eye-opening to me to realize all the little stuff that people can gamble on with sports. I mean, that does really seem to be, a big thing now. But I think just from a standpoint of the kids too, and the parents, I wonder too if it is just more of like we, as parents, like we have the means to do this, and for some people it is the like I didn't have that opportunity when I was younger, or that type of thing. And then I think there also is this idea that if my kids don't play on a club team, there's no chance that they're going to be able to do the sport in high school or later on in life.
And that's very strong now.
Yeah. And I think, even for us too, we got to the point like where my one son, who was very good at, or, seeming to enjoy baseball, a certain sport, just like where the Little League just wasn't as competitive for him anymore, and so then it's like, oh, if you want to maybe be more competitive, then then the next option are club sports.
This has always been a headache for me. In parish ministry, it was a headache because I watched parents complain that, that we need to restructure our timing for our confirmation class instruction and everything because my kid's in club sports. And the thing is that it's tied to their socialization. In other words, it isn't just so that my kid can be a premier athlete, but all of his friends are there. And then, so parents will say, I have to make a judgment as to what's best for my child. And quite honestly, we could bounce around to other churches till we find one that's going to schedule around club sports, because I think it's important for the child to be in club sports. And then, now that they're charging a lot of money for it, hey, I did confirmation class for free.
Yeah, again, let's think back to the past. Back when families had more children in them, 4, 5, 6 being quite common, what did kids do when they wanted to play a game? Whether it was, a sport like baseball or basketball, or whether it was tag or whatever, they would play with their siblings, wouldn't they? They'd have, that little group right there that they could work on their skills without a whole lot of pressure usually. And if they lived in a neighborhood, well, then they had all the neighborhood kids too, because back then people would let their kids go outside and let them walk down the street with to play in another kid's yard and things like that. And so a lot of this, Bob mentioned the socialization. It's like, well, that happened because you had your family, you had other kids in the neighborhood and such. And to a certain extent, all this really organized sports stuff is just replacing what should be there anyway, and certainly used to be there. And, it would just be good if, society wide, we could just kind of stop and say, hey, is this really what we want to be doing? Maybe we should try the old way again, because that actually worked better and produced kids that were better adjusted.
Well, and I'm always asking myself, what is the end point? We do this when the girls were growing up, and some wanted to play basketball and some wanted to do magic tricks and things like, you buy things for your kids and so forth. What is the end game? What are we ultimately trying to accomplish? And I think when you start challenging families to be spending hundreds and thousands of dollars so that my kids can participate in sports, I'm not really in a position to be critical, but I am in a position to challenge. And the challenge that I would present is, when it's all said and done, what was the objective? What were you looking to accomplish? And does it glorify God? Does it serve others? My problem is I never have heard positive answers in that regard. I always hear a lot of, well, it's good for my kid. It's good for them to feel comfortable. It's good for them to use their abilities, all that kind of stuff. Well, okay. Quite honestly, that's kind of low-hanging fruit. That's kind of obvious. Why else? I don't like deer hunting, so I'm not fighting to be on the deer hunting team. So we're not doing that. But if I really like, playing football, and then I want to argue for it and everything, then it's all about me. And I think that those are the questions we got to be asking as parents. But then if you decide you're going to put your foot down and say, well, we're not going to be spending this kind of money and everything, you're going to have to be prepared for some blowback. I mean, there's consequences for standing your ground, and you got to do it in an evangelical way. You got to find a way to do it.
Yeah. Well, the last thing to not really discuss, because we don't have much time, but to kind of make note of, yes, as Bob mentioned, I was saying something about like, we should have an AI corner or an AI discussion every time we do the current events, because in the past, we've talked about the person who was dating their AI, and then we had talked about somebody who had married their AI, and lo and behold, there are now people that want to have children with their AI. So I thought, there's quite a progression there. What's next? I'm scared to ask.
Yeah, well, the next thing would be is now they, I don't know, we did a story here in one of our current events about the death pod over in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to integrate AI to that, so that before you can push the last button to make it all happen, you actually have to participate in like a 5-minute Q&A to make sure that you are making a sound decision, which is...
And the AI will be able to tell you
right,
if you are making a sound decision.
So I don't want to get into all of that yet, because I've got some pretty radical theories on where I think AI is going to go on this. I think that there's some crazy things that are coming down, and I love. I mean, you're hearing this from a guy who loves AI. I use it daily. I open up multiple AI streams on my computer that I use throughout the day, throwing things against it, and inputting stuff into it and everything. But I know it so well that I also know how dangerous it can be. And I think a lot of people, are surrendering much to AI that you probably shouldn't surrender.
Well, thank you both for the discussion today. And we want to thank all of our listeners, too, for joining us. And your support is what makes all of this possible. So thank you very much for that. And if you have any questions on this episode, please let us know at lifechallenges.us. We'll see you back next time. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're here to help, so if you have questions on today's topic or other life issues, you can submit them, as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us, or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. You can find past episodes and other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so please check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.